previous decades. Normal, long hair, no responsibility, fathering children, living in communes, not having a job, growing your hair long, going to protests on the Vietnam War when at the time you were supposed to support your country. Okay, we'll talk about some of those things also. Now, their everyday actions, the members of the youth of America in the 1960s, were so uncommon in our country in comparison to other decades that many historians, and I think are true, lead to big-time problems we have today. What's probably the #1 problem we face today they didn't have in the 1960s because of what we just talked about in these examples? Unemployment, no question, okay? Unemployment is one. I'm going to give you 3 that I think are really important. This is the Randy Durr, give you my opinion, hit you right between the eyes, okay? I think our unemployment problems in our country today stemmed right here from the counterculture movement because these people didn't study what they needed to be successful to earn a living. And you know, that manifests into their children and then their children and then their children, right? Okay? So, unemployment, I think, is something that we face. What else what we might be facing today that could have started back there? Well, yeah, maybe. That's a very good guess, but I'm talking more philosophically, our attitudes towards going to work, unemployment. What might be another thing? Okay? What did some of these now generation beliefs maybe contribute to today that we're, what's that?
Raising children?
Kind of. Let me ask this, what do Americans have a lack of respect for today that they didn't in 1960?
Adults.
Adult leadership. Very good. Adult leadership, okay? Not only towards adults and authority in general, but who else gets criticized like crazy? Government. In 1960, if the President of the United States stood up and said something, everybody in this country said, "You're damn right." He knows what he's doing. He's the president. Okay, respect. Because of things we'll talk about with the Vietnam War, we talked some about Lyndon Johnson, we're going to go into Nixon, we're going to go into Watergate, where he lied to the American people. I think this counterculture movement and their rejection towards leadership and their attitudes towards authority, both adults and government, was the start of what we have today. Because prior to this, that was not the case. Even when I started teaching in 1980, you know, the administration would say, "You're going to treat your teachers with the same darn respect that you treat your parents." That's not so true anymore. Now, I think in this class, I'm guessing that's maybe more true than just in general. But kids treat, I mean, I wouldn't want a lot of my students in this school in general to treat me like they treat their parents. I've seen how they treat their parents. It doesn't work very good. Now, again, I'm speaking to a group of kids that treat their parents very well. But that's not the case. Okay, what's another thing that really might be that you're involved in and I've been involved in for 51 years? Attitudes towards education. No question. In the 1960s and 50s and even into the 70s a bit, by God, my dad, I don't know if your parents still tell you this, my dad said, "If you get in trouble at school, I am going to kick your ass when you get home." There was no question about it. He didn't care what happened. I don't care if the teacher would have committed murder. My dad would have backed the teacher. That's just the way it was. Education was important. My dad graduated from the 8th grade, worked his butt off his whole life. He told me, "You go to school and you learn something. You don't want to learn something at school, you go get a job and you start seeing what it's like." Okay, I mean, I can remember that like it was yesterday. I'll tell you another story, then we'll get back to education. I got a lot of stories as I'm old. My dad was a very quiet cowboy, believe that or not. My mother, if you ever watched Everybody Loves Raymond, anybody seen that show? My mother was exactly like Marie. I swear my wife and I laughed when we watched that show because that's my mother. Now my dad was very quiet, very, very quiet. I think I told you the story about, you know, what my mother's philosophy was on Bill Clinton. I think I told you. But anyway, one day, okay, I got to back up. Okay, in the old days we had chalkboards, okay? And we had this teacher named Tim Schlingold. He was just kind of a dip, okay? You have those, right? Math teacher, but he was a great big guy. And nobody really liked him. And every day we had his class after lunch. And every day we would go take the chalk off his chalkboard, so he'd come in every day and have to go get another piece of chalk. I mean, how stupid is that? But that's what we did. It's a big funny thing. And I'm not making this up, I didn't do it much. I did it once in a while, but we all kind of took our turn. So I'm coming in late from lunch one day, and I sat at my desk, just like you have desks, and we used to have those grooves that you could put your pencil in, you remember those? Well, I sat down, and Mr. Schlimbo hasn't got in yet, and my desk is heaping with what? Chalk off of the chalkboard. So I'm thinking, okay, because the guy's not going to think that I took it off there and put it on my desk. My buddy Sam Stokey, who's my dentist now in Laurel, he thought it'd be funny, so he just stuck all this chalk on my desk. So I'm sitting like right where Jay Lynn is, and he walks in, and he goes down the chalkboard, and he's just furious. And of course he looks, and I got this stack of chalk on my desk. So he just grabs me, and you could do that in those days, out of the desk, over across the hall, boom, boom, about 3 times into the lockers. And so I'm not making this up. And he said, "You're not getting back into my class until you eat every bit of that chalk." I am not, you can't make a story like this up. I'm not kidding you, okay? So, what do? So, I go down to Mr. Clark, who is the counselor, very good friend of mine to this day, in his late 80s, and I tell him the story. And of course, he can't believe it, you know, because, I mean, really. So he says, I'm just not one of these stories I'm telling you like that have a joke punch. This is a true story. So he says, just go down and tell Mr. Schlimbo you're sorry, even though you didn't do it. Just say, hey, I'm sorry I did that. I mean, that's the only way I can see out of this thing, okay? So I suck it up and go down between classes, and Mr. Schlimbo, I don't want to talk to you, I'm really sorry. I took all your chalk off your board, although I didn't. And I'd like to be back in class. And he says, well, yeah, you can get back in class as soon as you eat all of that chalk. Okay, so Mrs. Tadson was the librarian, very nice lady. She came to my wedding here, by the way, about 35 years ago, all the way from Forsyth. I couldn't believe it. She was old then, and I'm sure I know she's not alive now. So she let me hide out in the library during Algebra 2 class. And I, at this point, didn't care whether what do you do? So I go over there and hide out for about a week during 5th period. And he doesn't say anything because I haven't eaten the chalk. So finally, I go in there the 6th day or 7th. Poor Mrs. Gadsden had a little tear in her eye. She really liked me. I can't have you in the library anymore because Mr. Schlimbo found out. And so you better go talk to him. So I go back over to Mr. Schlimbo and I tell him, I'm sorry I did this again, which I didn't do. You're not getting into here till you eat the chalk. Walk back down to Mr. Clark's room, and I said, what do we do? He says, you got to get your dad in here. I said, I do not. My dad won't even believe this story. He said, you got to get your dad in here. That's what you got to do. So I go home after, this has been like a week, right? And I tell my dad this story. And my dad was the type of guy that worked his butt off. He came home at 5 o'clock, he drank a beer, he had supper, he drank a couple more beers, and he watched the news, went to bed. He did not want to be bothered with nonsense, right? So I get him set down and tell him the story, and he first of all, he thinks I'm lying. Right off the bat, you're lying. No, that's you're lying. I said, you got to come to school. He says, well, here's what he said. He said, I'm going to go up to school, and if I find out you're lying, I'm going to bring you home and I'm going to kick your ass. That's what he told me, and he would have. Are they listening?
Pardon the interruption, just a couple of announcements before we go to lunch for today. Just a reminder, prom this weekend, the Grand March, and this lineup is outside in the Commons area for
This is really ruining a good story.
to see where you're at in the Grand March and lineup for this Saturday. And also the Grand March begins approximately at 8 o'clock. So those kids involved in the Grand March on Saturday, make sure that you show up approximately 7:30, quarter till, so we can get you into the lineup process. Again, all that lineup is on the Commons, on the wall, right outside the Commons. So you'll see that when we go to lunch today. Also, just a reminder, next week is a block schedule to Aspire testing, and we will have those schedules out amongst the halls. So if you get confused on what time your periods are next week, those will all be located in the various directions throughout the course of the school. And also, we had someone that decided to vandalize one of the locker rooms here today and punched a hole and kicked a hole in the wall. We are going to investigate this, but if that particular party or parties that did that particular vandalism would like to turn themselves in, I can guarantee there will be a minimum consequence. If we find out through investigation that that particular student did that without turning themselves in, there will be a large consequence for that. Again, vandalism is not appreciated in our school, and if anybody knows who did that, please come to the office or shoot an email to either Mr. Supas or myself. Thank you.
Okay, so my dad comes up to the school. I had a better long drawn out story, but I'll give you the short version. My dad comes to school. He doesn't believe me. We get in the office. Mr. Schlinbolt is asked to say what happened. He says what happens. I said what happens. Exactly the story I told you. And my dad looked at him and he said, you know, Mr. Schlinbolt, he says, if my son did something wrong in your class, you can do anything you want. You can have him scrub toilets. You can have him come in and wash your desk. You can, you know, have him come in and clean the school. You can keep him after school every day for the rest of his life. You can do anything you want, but she's not eating that chalk. And Mr. Schlinbolt said to my dad, well, Mr. Durr, he says, that's the only way he's getting back in. Mr. Goyette, the principal, says, Mr. Durr, could you take you and your son out to the hallway for just a minute? And we went out in the hallway, and I mean, this guy just ripped this teacher. Just ripped his heart out. And we walked back in, he says, well, Mr. Schlinbolt and I have had a conversation, and we're going to let you back in tomorrow. The point being is that my dad, even under those circumstances, did not believe me. He believed the teacher. And that's how it went. So my point is, we've had really a change in education. Even in the 34 years that I've been here, 35th year this year, I've seen such a change in education and attitude towards education, you just can't even believe it. But it's part of what happened, in my opinion, as a result of this counterculture. Okay, tomorrow we're going to have a quiz. Don't panic. Anything I gave you in these 2 days' lectures is fair game. I'll ask you about 10 questions. It'll be worth about 20, 30 points, and we'll have it tomorrow during class. Anybody going to be gone tomorrow during class? Okay, well, if you're gone tomorrow, you need to make it up before the weekend.